Hi, this is Bob Wells here, and welcome to Undercurrent Stories. This is the show where we hear about people's interests and uncover some fascinating stories at the same time. I hope you enjoy today's show. Hello and welcome to Undercurrent Stories. In today's show, I'm really pleased to be joined by Vincent Doumeizel. Vincent is a senior advisor on the oceans to the United Nations Global Compact, as well as director of the food programme at the Lloyd's Register Foundation. In recent years, Vincent has devoted himself to promoting a food revolution and environmental solutions based on sea resources, especially seaweed. Vincent leads the charitable objectives of the foundation through the funding of innovative projects to drive safety in the food supply chain. And partnering with the UN, FAO, World Bank, WWF, universities, NGOs and large brands, Vincent released the Seaweed Manifesto and now co-leads the Global Seaweed Coalition with the objective to scale up the seaweed industry safely in order to address some of the world's most important challenges such as hunger, global warming, pollution and poverty. Vincent's recent book, The Seaweed Revolution, was released last year and continues the journey into how seaweed has shaped our past and can help save our future. Hello and welcome to the show, Vincent.
Welcome. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you ever so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
Seaweed is almost sort of taken for granted on beaches. My own, just before we talk about seaweed in detail, my own sort of thoughts are, I remember as a child on Brighton Beach, the stuff would be on the beaches, either fresh or not so fresh. And I went on a holiday in Wales to Swansea in about 1969, and they had a product called lava bread. And I remember thinking at the time, oh, this is interesting. And then more recently, I was over in the Caribbean, and we had a load of seaweed. I think it was sargassum came up on the beach, and almost, they had to clear it up and everything. Yeah. But anyway, before we talk about seaweed, Vincent, could you just tell us a bit about yourself, your life journey, and how you decided to become involved in how seaweed can help save our future?
Well, I started my career in the food sector, and I have 20 years experience in the food sector initially, and I started working in Africa when I was very young, with, I think, as shaped my perception of things somehow. And notably, I realized what world hunger means. And it doesn't look very good when you are 20 years old. So I really decided to work as much as I can to mitigate world hunger and to support a better resilience in the food systems. And after 20 years, I just realized that there's no solution, on land. So we have exhausted our land. We have still 1 billion people starving on this planet. We have 300,000 people in addition to feed every day on the planet. So you can imagine it's a lot. They want more meat, more animal protein. So and the yields are stable or declining. The cities grow bigger. There's less and less arable land. So there's no obvious solution. And in the meantime, our food systems are the biggest contributor to global warming, water scarcity, biodiversity loss, and social issues as well. So it looks like there's no solution. And after 20 years, I was about to come to that conclusion. Then we realized that the planet is blue mostly. It's a blue planet because it's 71% covered by ocean. And this 71% of our planet contribute to less than 2% of our food. So it's like there's an untapped potential lying in the ocean. We are still hunters-gatherers, which is why my book is called The Seaweed Revolution, because I'm hoping about a civilizational revolution, like a systemic revolution, like we had back 12,000 years ago when we stopped being hunters-gatherers and became farmers on land. But that was only on land. That was the Green Revolution. That's when we went out of prehistory to become civilized. Because civilization is about managing your ecosystem and not being hunters-gatherers. But we are still hunters-gatherers in the ocean, which is why I decided to devote the rest of my career, I would say, to support this cause, which goes beyond seaweed. We are talking about building a global ecosystem in the ocean. So we should talk about all type of algae. We should talk about shellfish and fish, of course, and all these ecosystems that we have massively destroyed over the last 50 years with all our waste, all our runoff, and we do not manage at all this ecosystem. So, of course, the idea is not to reproduce the same mistakes we did on land and to cannibalize or to be in a predation mode of with the ocean, but to really build a new regenerative system from scratch. And when we talk about the basis of life of the ecosystem in the ocean, the basis is seaweed, basically, because everything at the basis of the pyramid of the food chain, and everything grows upon it. So that's why I started my journey about, okay, let's try to promote and spread the gospel about the amazing potential and benefit of seaweed.
Thank you for that. Just to be clear on seaweed, it is algae, is it?
No, seaweed are the macroalgae, which are the multicellular algae. There's 12,000 of them around.
12,000 types?
Very different. There are 12,000 type of seaweed. They are all edible. So when you talk about seaweed, they are all edible. Algae include the microalgae, which are the phytoplankton, what we call also phytoplankton, which are unicellular algae. It tend to include as well some cyanobacteria, depending on how we agree on the definition, like spirulina. Spirulina is a microalgae or a cyanobacteria, to be accurate. So far, it may change very soon. But so far, I have devoted my time to support macroalgae, which is seaweed. But I still seaweed name is a disservice because it doesn't mean what it is. Because there's many potential for seaweed, but we can do many things with seaweed. But really, we'll talk further about it. But you can do anything with seaweed. But I've never seen anyone smoking seaweed, so it's not weed. Clearly, you cannot smoke it. So and to be serious, I think it's not also something unwanted that grows in your garden, like the weed.
Yeah.
In Norway they call it sea forest, which shows how much you should take care of them and how much you should protect them, because they are really the basis of biodiversity. In Japan or Korea, they call it sea vegetables. So you can hear how delicious and healthy it could be. And I think seaweed, it doesn't mean anything, and that's quite a disservice to the product. So we should change the name for it.
Well, thanks for clarifying that. And when it starts to grow, does it grow? Does it start off on the seabed, or does it, like macroalgae? Does it actually grow just in the sea by itself? Is it attached to the ground? Is what I'm trying to say.
Normally, it's attached to the ground.
Yeah.
Some of them are drifting away, like sargassum that you mentioned. They are the only seaweed that can drift away and get reproduced without any substrate. But there's a massive number, a wide diversity of seaweed. That's something to be remembered. It's very hard to talk about seaweed as a generic term. Just to give you an illustration of that, these are the oldest multicellular organisms that we have on the planet. They are about 1.52 billion years old. It started with the red and then the green seaweed. There are three types: the green, the red, and the brown. The brown is a different story. They are babies. They came on board only 200 million years old, so they are very new. The red and the green are more than 1 billion years old. The green moved on land 500 million years ago and gave birth to the entire vegetation that you see out of evolution. They became oak trees, they became strawberries, they became, and so forth. So today, green seaweed, and there are 4,000 of them, widely different. The green seaweed, any of them, is clearly genetically much closer to an oak tree, to a strawberry, or to any other tree than it is to a red seaweed. And the difference from an evolutionary perspective or from a genetic perspective, the difference between a red seaweed and a green seaweed is bigger than the difference between a fungi and an elephant.
Wow.
Did you get it right?
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So, and thank you for that. So, in terms of the history of humans using seaweed, obviously, it's still widely used in Japan. What happened? Did we used to use it a lot more? What's actually happened over the last 12,000 years?
Yeah. There's a recent article from The Guardian that was released a few weeks ago, showing that it used to be. People used to eat it a lot, and in fact, we became sapiens because we were eating a lot of seaweeds. it has been demonstrated by science that only a massive intake of polyunsaturated fatty acids that we can only find in algae has generated the mutation of our brain. So it means that over thousands of years, we were eating a lot of seaweed. And we know as well now that the sapiens has established in America 30,000 years ago, following the kelp highway coastline, the coastline, which is now called the kelp highway because that was the biggest seaweed forest in the world at this time. So they were just hunter-gatherers, and and where they were hunting and gathering was in the ocean mostly, not much on land. So they follow that line all the way. And the oldest trace of seaweed consumption we have is 14,000 years old in the south of Chile. And we know for sure that over this, before we made up agriculture about 12,000 years ago, we were using a lot of seaweed. Now what happened is that somewhere around the Mediterranean region, we made up agriculture. It happened to be very, very efficient as a process. It fed a lot of people. We established the first cities around the Mediterranean region. The Med Sea is not a very good one for seaweed. It's closed, it's warm, there's no tide, there's no current. So it's not good for seaweed, and it does benefit to invasive tides of seaweed and so forth. So with the erection of the first cities with no cleaning system, we can imagine where everything was ending up in the water. We can imagine that they suffered from massive seaweed tides, just like the one you saw in Caribbean, for instance, and that they got disgusted about it. And we can see writings from Virgil or from Aristotle stating that seaweed is the vilest element on the planet. Ocean hates so much seaweed that is vomiting them on the beach and so forth. And it seems like at this stage in history, we decided consciously to remove seaweed and most of the ocean food from history, from the playground. So, and everywhere this Greek and Roman civilization went, they removed seaweed from history. Vikings, they were traveling so far because they were using seaweed as a food, and seaweed has a lot of vitamin C. So when they were traveling by boat, they did not suffer from scurvy because they were eating a lot of vitamin C out of seaweed. They didn't know about it. But when they were culturally invaded by the South, Greek and Roman and so forth, they stopped using seaweed, and then they all died from scurvy, and they stopped traveling far. And when the European came in America, they removed that tradition. Once again, oldest trace in Chile, but no one is eating seaweed anymore in America. Almost no one. Same with the Maori in New Zealand, same with the Aborigines in Australia. And the only place where we still daily eat seaweed is in Japan, because Japan was the only place in the 19th century that was not colonialized by the European. So, of course, we should also consider a traditional aspect, because the medicine, the Chinese medicine, which is the one in Japan mostly, has established a close link between health and food, and there's nothing healthier than seaweed when it comes to food. So they kept that tradition. But I think still the fact that they have not been invaded by European in the 19th century enabled them to keep that tradition. So yes, we were eating a lot of seaweed, and it came back in Ireland, for instance, during the famine period. As soon as we run out of resource, which is the case right now, as you know, as we all know, as soon as we run out of resource, we turn our gaze again to the ocean and find that it's full of seaweed, which may be the greatest untapped resource we have on the planet.
It's interesting you say about how the Western civilization seems to have been the civilization that has almost, or its influence has actually negated the use of it. And I mentioned earlier on about lava bread in Wales, which I guess you're very familiar with. And that was in the late 60s.
Indeed, lava bread, but it's not very popular anymore.
Precisely. Yeah, precisely that. I mean, I know over the years I've mentioned lava bread to Welsh people, and they've looked at me with glazed eyes, as though it sort of died out there as well.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. And same in Ireland. I mean, there is a seaweed is tainted by a notion of food for the poor people. food during famine. So it looks like it's negatively perceived because it's a food for poor people. Same in the north, in the Faroe Island and so forth. So there's still this wrong perception about seaweed that it's what you need to eat when you've got nothing else.
Yeah. Wait, in terms of its nutritional value, I was very it was very interesting that you mentioned that there are 12,000 types and they're all edible. Um, what sort of research has been done into the nutritional value? You mentioned vitamin C earlier on. What sort of research has been done into its nutritional value, and what types of nutrition does it provide for the human?
Well, once again, there are 12,000 times. They are all very different. So there's a wide range of nutritional benefits, and of course, it will differ from one seaweed to the other. So it's very hard to speak in a general way. But let's say that seaweed has a lot it's packed with nutrients anyway. It's a nutritional bomb. Of course, iodine, zinc, iron. You can, of course, protein as well. It's full of protein. So the red seaweed, they can get up to 40% protein. When you think that soy, which is the basis of our protein on land, is 25% protein. So the red seaweed can be 40% protein, which comes to the question about why are we feeding our salmon in Scotland with GMO soy meal imported from Brazil, which has deforested Amazonia, while we have nutritious red seaweed full of protein growing nearby. But that's another thing. So it's full of omega-3 or fatty acids, this famous long chain fatty acid. It can contain for some of them vitamin B12, which is the only vegetal which contain vitamin B12, which makes it very important for vegan, and they know it for sure. So it's once again, there's a lot of nutrients, and it's very healthy. There's no fat, there's no sugar. There's a new flavor, the umami flavor, which makes it very attractive as well once you get used to it. So it's very powerful. In Japan, for instance, we know that the daily intake of seaweed contributes there to the exceptional long life expectancy in good health and the very low level of cancer, diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease. So that's very positive. Seaweed is naturally antibacterial, antiviral, anti-inflammatory, analgesic, and antifungal, and it's the best probiotic you can find for your guts and your microbiome. So yeah, it's packed with nutrients, and the good thing is that once you dry it, you can keep it for almost years, I would say, and it will retain its nutrients. It will retain its structure, which is different to the land vegetal, which tends to lose them when you dry them. But seaweed, you can keep them for months, transport them away with no need for any cold chain, which is a very good news for our climate and emerging people as well who are starving.
This to me is manna from heaven. I'm trying to find something that would be, I'm not doing it deliberately, but trying to find something that would be negative about it. Everything you've said so far appears to be. The only thing that I can think of that listeners might be questioning is, you mentioned how it helps clean the oceans. And we know that we put a lot of rubbish into the oceans, nitrogen and stuff like that. If I'm going to eat seaweed, how do I know that I'm not eating what's been put in the sea?
You will in some ways, always, of course, but less than you eat, less than if you eat fishes, which are at the end of the food chain. Remember, if you remember your your school lessons, you remember that nutrients accumulate over the food chain and pollutants, notably. So if you are worried about heavy metal, about all this kind of thing, then you should not eat any tuna or any salmon, because that's where the heavy metals accumulates. Seaweed level will be quite low. We have a very stringent, a way too stringent, I would say, right now in Europe and US regulation, which prevent the commercialization of any seaweed that is over a certain level. And once again, we are in the over precaution mode, which is a big deal because it prevents the commercialization of our product. We are like 100 times more demanding than in Japan, where they eat seaweed every day. So it's a bit nuts, but that's another story as well. When you mention nitrogen, that rings another question to me, which is why we leave this nitrogen and this phosphate get lost in the ocean. I mean, seaweed is a very good way to capture it. Actually, we dump indeed in the ocean in Europe. We dump 5.5 European Union only 5.5 million tons of nitrogen in the ocean a year, and this is lost. This is lost forever. It goes in the deep ocean. It's lost. It's sedimented, and it's and why don't we use seaweed to recover that nitrogen and put it back on land? I mean, and there's nothing new here. And the same with phosphate. Phosphate, we are extracting phosphate from mines in West Africa mostly. We pay more and more a fortune for that. We've got less and less. There was a Guardian article recently stating about the risk of a phosphageddon, which would be a massive shortage of phosphate, which would lead to massive starvation because there will be no agriculture anymore. So we are at risk of this because we will run out of phosphate, and we leave the phosphate in the ocean. I mean, when you put 1 liter of phosphate on your plant, I mean, there's only 1% that goes in your plant. The rest goes in the soil, then in the water, and then in the ocean. So it all ends up in the ocean. In China, what they do is that they use seaweed farm to collect their phosphate and their nitrogen, because seaweed will absorb all the phosphate and all the nitrogen that is in the ocean. And then they harvest this seaweed once a year and put them back on land so they can fertilize their field, their culture, with natural phosphate and nitrogen, which come from seaweed. And coastal community knows that for centuries. They put seaweed on their garden or on their field and on their production and so forth. So in 5 years' time, China will be neutral in phosphate when we will pay more and more to buy our phosphate in Africa or in Russia. So seaweed, and that may be the biggest potential, even way beyond the food aspect, the potential to create something really regenerative between the ocean and the land, to reconnect the land and the ocean. Because so far we just let the farming run off in the ocean, and we let them go and destroy the biodiversity there. There's no management. If we manage it well, then we can create some kind of really circular economy, where the nutrients that comes from the land are recycled, upcycled by seaweed, and you collect the seaweed, you move them back on land, and the circle goes again and again. And that's life on this planet is all about cycles, and we have neglected the fact that the ocean play a pivotal role in all these cycles, not only for phosphate or nitrogen, but also for carbon. Seaweed can play a very strong role for carbon and for fresh water and for oxygen. Everything is recycled by the ocean, and most of the problem that we are facing in the big crisis today come from the fact that we do not manage the recycling part delivered by the ocean. We do not support or help this part, and as long as we don't, we will be in trouble.
Hi, it's Bob here, just a quick interlude. Hope you're enjoying this episode, and if you would like to hear more interesting interviews, we have over 80 episodes to date with many fascinating guests talking about a wide variety of topics which include music, history, philosophy, fitness, food and drink, adventure, contemporary culture, and many, many more. I'm sure there's something that you'd really enjoy. So all you need to do is just visit undercurrentstories.com or search Undercurrent Stories in any of the podcast platforms. And now back to the show. You mentioned there about carbon. Is that because seaweed sequestrates carbon?
Of course it does. Seaweed, some seaweed in Chile, they can grow up to 40 centimeters a day, up to 60 meters high. So they can sequester a lot of carbon. They are like forests. The wild seaweed around the world, they absorb as much carbon as the global emission from United Kingdom and France globally. So that's quite massive. And the more you will grow seaweed, the more you will absorb and also potentially sequester carbon, because the good thing is that seaweed tends to end up in the deep ocean. And unlike to land, there's no bacteria, or not many, to degrade biomass in the deep ocean. So when you have a tree that loses leaves or branches, it gets degraded by or dies. It will get degraded by bacteria, and then the carbon is removed in the atmosphere. In deep water, that's not what's happening. If it goes beyond 1,000 meters, it will be sequestered there for. I mean, the carbon will be sequestered there for thousands, if not millions, of years. So of course, seaweed has a role to play. I keep talking about this. There's an aquatic plant that proliferated back 50 million years ago. At this time, the planet was very warm. It was like way warmer. There was a lot of crocodiles and turtles in the Arctic. And then an aquatic plant called Azolla proliferated. And all over the planet, it decreased the temperature by 20 degrees, sinking in the deep ocean, sinking a lot of carbon, decreased the temperature by 20 degrees on the planet and created the climate that we have today. And this is called, from a geologic perspective, this is called the Azolla event, which has created our climate. So that has happened already. Of course, it took thousands of years, but hundreds of thousands of years. But I mean, seaweed has a role to play in the carbon cycle as well. Algae in general, they have a role to play, massive. Algae, I mean, micro and macro algae and all the plankton and so forth, it sequesters 30 to 40% of the carbon and 90% of the warming on the planet. So that does have a role to play in mitigating climate change, and there's also a role to play through the development of new products that will decarbonize our economy. Of course, I mean, we were talking about fertilizers, but we could talk about plastic as well. I mean, seaweed can replace plastic in a very efficient way. There's a lot of companies, notably one in UK, Notpla, was awarded with the Earthshot Prize last year by Prince William, seen as the best innovation to remove plastic. They are producing compostable and edible packaging, and they are supplying a lot of companies, all with Stadium in the UK and so forth, with their edible or compostable packaging out of seaweed. And you can replace, I mean, you can cut methane emission by large as well. We did not mention, but seaweed is a great source of animal feed. It will boost the immune system, reduce the need for antibiotics, improve animal welfare. But it will also, for some seaweed, cut methane emission by large. So one small red seaweed in Australia, Asparagus taxiformis, it ended up cutting methane emission by 90% in livestock. So just think about it. If you give just 40 grams a day of this small seaweed to each and every cow on the planet, the impact on climate change would be equal to stopping each and every car and truck on the planet overnight. So that's massive as well. 40 grams a day doesn't mean much. Huh? It doesn't look much, at least. It is, in fact. But yes, there's a lot of solution for our climate. But in general, to mitigate all type of crises we have on this planet, like the food crisis, the climate crisis, the environmental crisis, and we haven't even talked about the social crisis somehow, because you do not lead a revolution without tackling social injustice. And seaweed is a great source of new revenues and new jobs in coastal community where fishing resources are declining, and we know they will disappear. And doing that, they will contribute to gender parity and to women empowerment, because out of the experience we have in East Africa, for instance, we see that mostly the women are taking care of seaweed cultivation because the men are busy fishing. So in Zanzibar, for instance, which was a very traditional country and where women had not many rights, Zanzibar is no the seaweed is the third biggest export for the island, and it does contribute 80% of the revenues goes to women. So it does contribute to women empowerment. Women are sending their girls to school. They have more money, more power. They are independent and so forth. So it really played a role in bringing more social justice on the planet as well through this new type of organization that we can set up all together.
Yeah, I mean, you've mentioned the various things there: fertilizers, food, the social injustice correction, stuff like that. There's so many benefits I can see for it. Just moving on to the political side, and I'd like to talk about the commercial side, but the political side. Obviously, in your position, you meet a lot of people who are influential in politics, different organizations, different NGOs. I can't. What is holding us all back from sort of taking all this forward?
Lack of science. I mean, there's a big lack of science, and I think our politicians should fund more science. We don't know how to farm our own seaweed, basically. So we know how to farm the Asian seaweeds because they started 60 years ago to farm them, but we don't know how to farm our own seaweed. So, and I mean, it's like if you want to start agriculture in Sussex and you know only how to farm goyava, banana, and rice, you may have some troubles, and that's about the same. So we still have to learn how seaweed grow, how they reproduce, how they protect themselves naturally. All of this is to be understood, and we have started intensively science on seaweed 10 years ago, max. So there's very few labs working on that. So I think the biggest part is there, and I keep. I deliver a lot of school talks because I think that's where the change will take place, and that's where we need to attract more people to study marine biology and so forth, because we don't know what's happening in the ocean so far. We know more about the surface of the moon than what we have in the ocean. So studying marine biology is the first step in this TV revolution, because we don't want to mess it around again with the ocean. So let's start to do things which are scientifically driven, and we are lacking science. So the big problem is there. There's the problem with regulation. We should harmonize our regulation. We have some stupid situation when it comes to regulation, overprotection by large. There's a problem of education in general for kids, I would say, about the role of the ocean, but that's also education for anyone. So advocate, speak more about them. Then there's the problem about license to operate. It's very hard to get a license to operate in the ocean. It's quite easy to get one to pump oil from the ocean, but it's very easy to get a license. It's very uneasy to get a license to operate in our ocean, in Europe and America. It's very easy in Africa and in Asia, but we are kind of overprotecting here because we lack science. So it's like chicken and egg as well, and we should establish a market as well somehow.
Wait.
If we want to these seaweed farmers, these new seaweed farmers that are established here and there to survive, we need to support their production by consuming it. So we should learn how to eat seaweed, how to cook. We should promote an awareness on that at global level, at political level.
You mentioned there about overprotection. Is that overprotection for human safety or overprotection of the seaweed itself?
No, it's for overprotection for human safety, I would say.
Yeah.
It's hard. I would say overprotection. It sounds weird to say that, but for the environment, because seaweed are often related to the invasive wild seaweed that are proliferating. So we end up thinking that with the perception that if we grow seaweed, it will be the same, but which is not the case at all. So there's there's a lot of there's a very negative perception about seaweed, and we should improve that further. So overprotection mostly about human and about the potential impact on the ecosystem, which are, if we do things right, which are only beneficial to the ecosystem, because that may be the biggest impact of seaweed as well. The biggest benefit is that it will restore the ocean. It will repair biodiversity in the ocean. Anywhere you will grow seaweed, you will have a boost of marine life. It will provide habitat to fishes. It will provide food to marine life and so forth. So there's normally only positive benefit. It should be further documented, I agree, but there's a lot of benefit out of seaweed production.
So in terms of the production and the actual harvesting of seaweed, if we go ahead, say 10, 15, 20 years, my perception before I spoke to you was that we just get boats and we go out and get the seaweed. Obviously, that's not the case. It has to, I guess it has to be farmed relatively near the coastline.
Well, yes and no. I mean, there are some exceptions to that. I would say in general, yes, it should be farmed nearby the coastline, but it can be farmed quite far in case of upwelling area, which are this area where there's a lot of nutrients at the surface of the ocean because of temperature and current. So in West Africa, I mean in South Africa, off Namibia, they are the biggest seaweed farm that is shaping up at the moment. Thousands of hectares potentially. They are growing macrocystis, which are huge seaweed that can go up to 40, 50 meters high on cables that are immersed in the water. So the seaweed grows up to 30 meters, and then they harvest the canopy. So that's this kind of offshore cultivation. Because indeed, you're right. I mean, we should stop harvesting seaweed. I mean, it can be a leisure, it can be for fun, but we should stop living out of wild harvest. That's clear. We should move to farming, to cultivation. That's what civilization is about. And replant the seaweed more importantly, because they are disappearing. That's the other aspect that we tend to neglect. There's less and less seaweed. We have lost 80% of the biggest.
So we're not only are we causing problems in now, we're also starting to destroy seaweed species as well.
Of course, the ecosystem disruption that we generate with global warming is impacting very much seaweed. And once again, there's a fire below water, and no one cares. But we have lost 80% of the biggest seaweed forest of California, and the same in Norway, and the same in Tasmania. It has been eaten by urchins. It's an urchin desert. No, it's terrible. I mean, it's terrible to see. It's terrific. So yeah, it's we have to replant them. Coastal area are the most relevant places, of course, but we should do that in collocation with other activities. We could do that with oyster farming, with mussel farming, with fish farming, with wind farm, offshore wind farms as well. It makes a lot of sense to put cables in between and grow seaweed. So it does not mean that we need to have some places specific to seaweed production. On the contrary, we should integrate that production into other production so it delivers benefits to each other. So that's what we call the integrated multi-trophic aquaculture.
That's really interesting. It's really interesting to say that, because the BBC programme I listened to last week mentioned about a Cornish company that were doing, I think it was mussels, and the seaweed company was sort of piggybacking on the back, and they were helping each other.
But that's, I mean, we reproduce what's happening in nature. It's always biomimicking. I mean, nothing grows in isolation in the ocean. I mean, there's no monoculture in the ocean. It does not exist. In nature, it does not exist. And that's something that we should also avoid in setting up this new industry. So we should not develop monoculture. We should grow things together because they will deliver each other a lot of services. And ideally, if you put a fish farm, seaweed will absorb the dissolved nutrients. The mussels will absorb the organic nutrients. You put some sea cucumber at the bottom to clean the bottom of the ocean, and then you have a full ecosystem. So yeah, I mean, let's reproduce what nature is doing, and let's support nature. That's what we should do. We should not try to recreate something.
What's your feeling about when do you think seaweed to be able to go to the supermarket? When do you think that will be? I know you can get stuff online and you can go and get sushi.
Stuff in any organic shop normally. Yeah. I mean, I know that in UK you can get and you can get a very nice recipes online as well. That's very good because you need to learn how to cook seaweed. I'm always told that seaweed is no good. First of all, it's because we don't get the umami taste. It's a fifth taste that is quite absent in any of our tradition so far. But once you get used to it, I can tell you it's delicious. And umami, the name of the taste, means delicious taste in Japanese. And also, we need to learn how to cook them. I mean, if you eat a raw potato or a raw cocoa bean, I mean, it's not good and it's not healthy either, by the way. But if you cook them, then you have fries and chocolate and then you tend to like it. That's the same with seaweed. Let's cook it and make it delicious, and that can be delicious, I can tell you. Yeah, it's a fifth taste. I mean, we knew only bitter, sweet, salty, and acid, and they're the fifth one, which is umami, which is one you get in overcooked tomatoes and in some fungi as well, mushrooms, and in most of the seaweed. But in seaweed it's very strong, and we are not used to it, which is why it's so it's sometimes a bit strange for people to eat seaweed if you're not used, because it has a new taste. It's something that you are not used to.
It reminds me a little bit of the recent sort of popularity of kale, which was traditionally a sort of cattle feed. And it's interesting what you can do with kale. It looks a little bit like seaweed in as much as you can steam it, and it's nice. But you can also put a bit of olive oil, drizzle some olive oil on it and stick it in the oven and have it as a sort of, not too overdone, but as a crackly type of crisp.
Well, yeah, and the same with seaweed. I mean, kale is a descendant of green seaweed, anyway, remember? And so anything you can do with kale, you can do it with seaweed. And you can cook seaweed. There are some red seaweeds that are used as a replacement to bacon in the US, for instance, the Palmaria palmata, specific type that's the feel and the taste is slightly like bacon. So you can fry them, you can cook them, you can put them in sauce, use them as condiment. In France, seaweed tartare is becoming very popular. So you have a seaweed tartare for any aperitif, and we know that we are not kidding with aperitif in France. But yeah, it's more. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do. You can do dessert as well. I mean, put some nori. I mean, we are all familiar with nori because of the sushi, and it became quite familiar. And that's another example of food is fashion somehow, and food can change very quickly. Because if you had told my grandmother 30 years ago that I would pay a fortune to eat raw fish wrapped in seaweed in a Japanese restaurant, she would have said I'm totally nuts, and rice as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, but that's so popular, no? And that's, yeah, sushi are made with seaweed, and they are wrapped in seaweed. So you can do really a lot of things. I mean, and the nori, this type of sushi, is very good with chocolate as well as a dessert.
Right.
The red seaweed in general are very good in dessert, yeah, cooking dessert. So there's many things you can do and bring a new flavor. For the chefs, it's a new territorial gastronomy. It's a new territory for gastronomy. It's a new place to investigate. So it's kind of cool for them. And there's more and more chefs interested into that. I mean, we work with maybe the biggest chef on the planet in Menton, an Argentinian guy, Mauro Calogreco, and he's using 20 different type of seaweed. And if you look at the price of the dishes, I mean, I trust it should be good.
It all sounds very exciting. Is your general feeling as you travel and you talk about it and you experience different cultures, certainly in the West, is your view that it is beginning to gain traction?
It is, but it's very slow. The book helped a lot. That's also a key learning, is that the power of the book, we live in a digital age, but nothing is more powerful and more influential than the book, actually. So which is kind of cool from my perspective. But so the book helped a lot. It's getting traction, but it's very slow. Because it takes time to change perception. It takes a lot of time to change the systems. So we have built a coalition, a global seaweed coalition, which is hosted at the United Nations, where I'm working, and we have 1,500 members there, which are mostly seaweed stakeholders around the world. So we have a voice. So we are trying to raise awareness, but yeah, it's very slow, and unfortunately, the visibility of bad news remains bigger than the visibility about good news. So it's very hard to get our voice heard.
And if we've got any listeners who'd like to become involved in seaweed, either in the scientific research or commercially, what advice would you give them?
Well, first, would say try to experience seaweed, try to use them, try to cook them. And then you can take a look at our coalition, which is really trying. And I'm not saying, I mean, it's not for profit. So it's totally free coalition. You can join for free. Absolutely, it's a UN program, so it's really supporting the development of this industry. So I would advise them to take a look at the global seaweedcoalition.org, which is now the global place where to get information about what you can do, about who are the local players nearby you, so you can get information from them possibly, because there's a lot of stakeholders all around the coast. And I'm sure if you look on the map in our website, you will find some people next to you who are already working in that area or lab and so forth. And I think visiting them is the best way. Trying to see what is done next to you. I mean, it will have to be a local action in the end. So you need to get grounded into local action. So yeah, I would advise them to go on the website and to get some information, learn how to cook them, talk about it around them, get the information they can, and gradually, I think we have also implemented a seaweed ambassador program. There are some people who are really into it and really want to dedicate some of their time to support this seaweed revolution. So we are onboarding them on a seaweed ambassador program there, working pro bono to support this evolution. So yeah, there's a lot of things you can do, but best way, take a look at the global seaweed coalition website.
And have you got any other projects at the moment connected with seaweed that you're working on? Have you got another book, or are you doing anything new? Any other projects?
Well, yes, I have a lot of projects. I'm releasing in France a book for kids from 8 to 12 years, which should hopefully be released quite soon in UK. I will also release the cartoon, a comic book, but more for adult, like a big one, but comic, about like an adaptation of my book on the seaweed revolution. I will, on the media aspect, yes, and also more importantly at the political level, we have a lot of key events. The COP biodiversity, of course, will be important. The COP climate, we should follow up. There was good progress at the last one in Dubai. We should follow up in the next ones. COP biodiversity, there's a big conference upcoming in France, the UN Ocean Conference, which will be in Nice in 2025. And we should have like 30,000 people gathering, all the ocean community. That should be fundamental moment for the industry and for the political world to build up something and to define a seaweed strategy for the planet and for each and everyone in each country. We organized last October with the European Union and the French government the first ever EU summit in Paris, gathering 27 political representatives from the 27 different countries. So they can meet with us, with our members, understand from our members from Asia, so they can understand what is done outside of Europe, and so they can define in their respective country a strategy for seaweed, a political ambition, and that will be released in France hopefully soon, and in other countries should follow. And UK it's still very slow, but it's gaining interest, I would say. The Prince William is very interested. I met with Princess Anne recently, and she was very knowledgeable about seaweed. Actually, I was very surprised. Met with the Secretary of State for the Environment, Stephen Barclay, is very interested as well. So things is moving on. I mean, you will have the first big large-scale farm to Devon with Ollie Hicks, who was also invited in the BBC Food Programme. So that's the biggest seaweed farm we have in UK right now. So yeah, it starts to move, but it's slow, and we have a lot to do in the upcoming months to make it heard.
Well, it sounds really exciting. I'm going to have a look at some of those recipes that you mentioned. I think it sounds really good. It's been a great conversation, Vincent. Really interesting to learn more about seaweed and its potential. I don't think I'll ever look at seaweed in the same way again.
Thank you very much.
My guest today has been Vincent Doumeizel. Vincent is author of the book The Seaweed Revolution, and you can find links to the book and Vincent's work in the show notes. Thank you for coming on the show, Vincent.
Thank you very much.
You have been listening to Undercurrent Stories. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to share the show link to your friends and family, and if you have 60 seconds, I will be most grateful if you would please rate and review. To hear more episodes, please subscribe to the show and visit undercurrentstories.com. If you leave your email in the link, we will notify you as soon as new episodes are released. Also, check out our social media links, details of which can be found on the show notes. Until next time, this is Bob Wells wishing you all the very best.